You know, one thing I love about gathering together each week is that we get an opportunity to be lifted up and encouraged by our community. This ritual that we have of coming together and gathering each week is so important in my life, and I hope it's important in yours as well. I find that often, like the week, you can just be like, by the time Sunday rolls around again, you're just like all out of sorts sometimes, and you're just like, I need to refocus. And I need to get my mind right. I need to get back on the right path. And so hopefully coming to church can be a way to do that. You know, it's an opportunity to begin again, and again, each and every week. And so this is very important that we do this and we get together, whether we're here in this room or whether those of you who are worshiping with us online. This is really important stuff. And for the folks who received this letter that we're looking at, called Hebrews, I mean, the author talks about it in the letter. He talks about like don't neglect getting together and spending time with one another, because they were trying to hold fast to Jesus, but it was really hard, and they needed their community in order to keep holding fast to Jesus. And so, you know, I think if we try to do it on our own, we're just probably not going to succeed, in my mind. I want to ask you about something, and I wonder if you've ever had this experience. I've had it before, and maybe you can tell me if you've had this experience yourselves, where you show up to church, you find your seat like y'all have this morning, the music starts, you stand up to sing, and then you start looking at the lyrics and thinking about the words that you're singing, and you have the thought, I'm not sure I believe the words I'm singing this morning. Have you ever had that experience before? I have it sometimes. Sometimes the songs, I don't necessarily believe all the things I'm singing that are written in the songs. But that's okay, you know. They all can't be the perfect song all the time. But what I'm talking about, I was recently talking to someone who was going through a hard time, and we sang that song, King of My Heart. Y'all know that song. There's a part of the song that goes like this, like, you're never gonna let me down. You know that part of the song? And this person kind of cringed when she heard those words, because she was feeling let down by God in that season of her life. And so maybe in her mind, she more or less believed those words in theory, but in that moment, it didn't feel quite right. Has this ever happened to you all? That maybe they don't ring true? You know, for the early Christians living in the first century, they didn't have a lot of Christian songs probably. They probably had some that they had come up with at that point. But they did have the Psalms from the Hebrew Bible. And the Hebrew Bible was their scriptures. The Old Testament is what we call it. And they would sing these Psalms together in worship. And I imagine that there were moments when those first Christians would sing the words from a particular psalm, and they maybe had a hard time believing the words that they were singing. Let's read Psalm 8 together. And while we read Psalm 8, y'all can follow along as I read it. Keep in mind that the vast majority of these first Christians really struggled. And so imagine them, the early church, as they're struggling, as they're going through suffering and pain, reading this psalm or singing it together in worship. It says, Lord our God, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory in the heavens through the praise of children and infants. You established a stronghold against your enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, the works of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You have made them rulers over the works of your hands. You have put everything under their feet, all the flocks and herds and the animals of the wild, the birds in the sky, the fish in the sea, all that swims in the paths of the sea. Lord our God, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Let's try to imagine some of their thoughts. Now, we're just imagining here, and that's okay. You established a stronghold against your enemies. I can imagine some of these early Christians thinking, really? Like, my enemies are attacking me from all sides, and they literally just took my home from me. Doesn't feel like a stronghold against my enemies. What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. I get it, but I don't really feel cared for right now. You made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. Crowned with glory and honor? I feel very dishonored. My neighbors hate me, and they publicly shamed me. You put everything under their feet. I don't feel like I'm in control of anything right now. My patron has abandoned me, and I'm poor. There are regular famines. There is violence all around. Nothing is going right. Remember the first Christians, these Christians who received this letter or this sermon called Hebrews. They were letting go of their faith because of persecution, financial hardship, public shame, and disgrace. And it's interesting that the writer of Hebrews chose this particular song, Psalm 8, to quote in his sermon, to share with these struggling people. In Hebrews 2, 5 through 8, we read, "It is not to angels that he has subjected the world to come, about which we are speaking, but there is a place somewhere where someone has testified." And he quotes Psalm 8. "What is mankind that you are mindful of them, the Son of Man that you care for him? You have made them a little lower than the angels. You have crowned them with glory and honor and put everything under their feet. And putting everything under them, God has left nothing that is not subject to them." It's a little confusing language, but Psalm 8 was meant to be an encouragement. It was meant to encourage humanity of their prized place in God's creation. That humans bear God's image, that they are crowned with glory and honor, that they are given authority to care for all of creation. But maybe this wasn't so encouraging to the people who heard the Hebrew sermon. I imagine this psalm was hard for them to receive. They were living in an occupied land. They had no power. They were marginalized. They were poor. They were oppressed, and they were suffering. To think that they have a prized place in God's creation and God has crowned them with glory and honor, put everything under their feet, that would probably be hard for them to believe. Remember, they were likely poor. Christina talked about the patronage system last week and how they were probably rejected by their patrons who were helping keep them afloat. They were publicly shamed, it says in Hebrews. They were misunderstood. They were victims of violence, false imprisonment. People were confiscating their property. It's a beautiful thing to say that humans were created for glory and honor, but when they looked at their situation, it felt probably more like suffering and shame. God may intended people to have glory and honor, but you wouldn't know it by looking at the situation of these Christians. And the preacher of Hebrews understood this, and so he acknowledges in the next sentence that at the present they do not see things this way. He says, "Yet at present we do not see everything subject to them." So he's acknowledging this. Instead of seeing glory and honor, they see violence and heartache and death and pain. I can imagine the preacher pausing for a moment to let that current reality set in. He's like, yes, we do not see it right now. God has made promises to us, but we don't yet see it. And then perhaps after a long pause, he says, "But we don't yet see it, but." And then he says, "But we do see Jesus." Now, I would argue this might be the most important phrase in all of Hebrews, this entire book that we're looking at. But we do see Jesus. This is the first time Jesus' name is specifically mentioned in the sermon. This guy's brilliant who's writing this sermon. That he is referred to him as the Son up until this point. The preacher waits until the very end of this really long sentence in Greek to reveal who they actually see. They may not yet see the glory and honor that God has promised, but they do see Jesus. They may see violence, but they also see Jesus. They may see suffering and death, but they also see Jesus. They may see pain and hardship, but they also see Jesus. They may see shame and rejection, but they also see Jesus. Verses 9 and 10, but we do see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor because He suffered death, so that by the grace of God He might taste death for everyone. And bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what He suffered. So Jesus became human like us. He chose to become a little lower than the angels for a short time. And then He lived this life that was teeming with love and goodness and mercy and healing and grace. Much of the world hated Him. They hated Jesus. They hated the way He lived because in a way He exposed their own wretchedness. Evil and death tried to swallow Jesus by killing Him. But when they swallowed Jesus, they swallowed someone more powerful than they could have ever imagined. And through Jesus' death, He conquered death. And He was crowned with glory and honor. And Hebrews tells us that Jesus didn't keep the glory and honor all to Himself, but He made a way for all of humanity to share in His glory with Him. And so through Jesus, the promises of Psalm 8 will come to fruition. Humanity will be crowned with glory and honor, spending eternity in loving union with God and others. You know, one of the main points of Hebrews is to keep looking at Jesus. Perhaps this is the main point of Hebrews, to keep looking at Jesus. To those who wanted to let go of their faith, he encourages them to keep looking at Jesus. To those who have many doubts, many issues with religion, I've got a lot of doubts. I think as I get older, I have more doubts than I used to, which is kind of strange, right? As you learn more, though, you start to see that the world and things are more complicated than you originally thought. I've got a lot of doubts. I've got many issues with religion. I've got many issues with my religion that I ascribe to Christianity, particularly the way it's practiced in our world. I have many issues with the church. But I've been able to hold on to my faith, sometimes barely hold on to my faith, because I've decided to just keep looking at Jesus. You know, we hear many mixed messages about what God is like, about who God is, about what we should worship, and Hebrews challenges us to keep looking at Jesus. You know, this is honestly people who have suffered and have struggled. One thing I've done during the pandemic, and I'm not sure why I've been drawn to look at the stories of those who've come before me, but I have. So during the pandemic, I've been reading and learning about so many people who have come before me, who have suffered and struggled. And their stories have inspired me, the people who have been able to hold fast even through suffering and through struggle. And one of the reasons that many of them have been able to hold fast is that they've kept looking at Jesus. Even when, think about someone who was enslaved and their enslaver was hurting them in the name of their religion. But they were able to look at Jesus and keep looking at Jesus and realize that Jesus was about something very different than that religion of the slaveholder, right? Jesus is described in the Hebrews sermon as the pioneer of our salvation. I like this image. A pioneer goes out in front and finds a way through the wilderness. Things like salvation, new life, wholeness, peace. These things may seem very far off and maybe even unattainable in your life. The full life that God promises us may seem impossible to find. The obstacles in front of us may seem too big and too scary. We may not be able to see much goodness in the world around us. But we do see Jesus. Jesus is the pioneer. Jesus is the one going out in front, leading us into new territory, guiding us through the wilderness to salvation. We can't guarantee what's going to happen tomorrow. We can't even guarantee what's going to happen in a couple hours, right? We can't guarantee what's going to happen in a few years. We can't always see what God is up to. But we have this beautiful witness that's been given to us. We have these gospels, we have these letters, we have these sermons that are all about this wonderful human that was also God, that came and walked among us, who showed us what life is supposed to be like, who showed us what God is really all about. Hebrews says He is the exact representation of God's being. And we have all this, and we can see what Jesus is like. And if we can see what Jesus is like, then we can see what God is like. And I think when we truly see the face of God, like everything kind of changes. Because we know who we are when we can see God for who God is. When we can see Jesus, we know that we are loved by God. And we can get through anything, I believe. Jesus can walk with us. Jesus is the pioneer, going out in front of us. My friend Justin Rohr, who pastors a church here in town, he came and preached here one Sunday, and I remember what he shared because he was basically, his argument, if I remember correctly, was often we can't even see the path in front of us. It's so dark, it's so foggy, everything around us seems so chaotic and so full of darkness. But he says, all we need to do is keep our eyes on our guide. And we have a really good guide, and our really good guide is Jesus. And we don't even have to see the path sometimes, but we have a guide who can show us where the path is. We have a guide who is leading us through the wilderness, the pioneer of our salvation, the one leading us to this life that God has promised for us. And so, your life may be kind of out of control right now. You may feel like things are so out of control in this world, which they seem to be. And you may not be able to see all the promises that God has for you. You may not be able to see what's in front of you. You may not be able to see what's going to happen with this challenge that you're facing in your life. But I encourage you to keep looking at Jesus. Keep looking at Jesus. And that's what we're going to keep doing at our church. You may get sick of hearing us talk about Jesus, but we're not going to stop because that's the only thing giving us hope right now, just to be honest. So with that being said, we're going to share communion today.